My name is Mokena Makeka. I'm an architect and an urbanist and an entrepreneur, a lover of life and good design. I don't really have a particular design process, so to speak. I'm inspired by a number of things, so I watch a lot of movies. I go to the outdoors quite a bit, so funny enough, clouds inspire me, and asking myself, if I look at a cloud, can I see 3 or 4 different things, which is actually quite a difficult task, especially if you've seen one thing. It's very difficult to see other things. For me, the design process is about trying to find inspiration from the world around me, and also using a lot of history and reading and background. Part of the problem with design or creativity in general is that we sometimes think that everything comes from oneself. I'm often inspired by looking at how other designers have tackled particular challenges and problems. And some of these could be from 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 200 years ago. And the question is, what would I do if I was in their shoes? And what's the equivalent problem for me? So I actually take a lot of inspiration by other people's methods. And sometimes it includes music. If you think of jazz or hip hop, where the act of freestyling is both a wild moment of uncertainty. It's almost like when you have a blank sheet of paper and you're drawing, and there's that fear to put the first line down, and then you put one down, and then a second, and then a third, and then a fourth, and the next thing, the drawing is teaching you things, and that's similar to music. So I think it's quite important to be very agile and to be inspired by different things. A chef can be inspiring, just the way they totally redesign a typical food and use different combinations of flavors. You start thinking, well, what's the architectural, the design equivalent of a reinvented menu? Ideation is tricky for me. I mean, I wish I could almost bed it down. Sometimes it feels like I'm trying to, catch a black ball in a dark room, and I'm blindfolded. And I just have to kind of reach out and grapple for this thing. I find that I often do there's a couple of tools that I use to help me think about things, and I have what I call a sort of 3-legged pot. So the one is, what is the concept? So does the design have a clear and discernible idea that I can describe to somebody? And that idea could be a political impulse, it could be an agenda, it could be a desire. That's the one. The other one is craft, like, if this thing was to be made, what would it be made of? What type of qualities am I looking for? Is it soft? Is it hard? Is it stretchy? Is it soft? I said soft twice, but you know what I mean. And for me, it's about unpacking that second one. And the third one really is content. And content for me is quite an important part of my process, which is, what is it meant to do? Some people create for the sake of creating. And I think that that's maybe the distinction between art and design. An artist is able to produce work that is very self-reflective, very internalized, very productive in terms of pushing a particular agenda, but it's really very much about an internal journey more often than not. Whereas design takes the same type of process and has to put it to some degree of purpose. What is this thing doing beyond me? What is its role once I leave the room? What is its role once I've handed it over? And I think if one is able to answer these 3 questions, it allows many designers, I think, to imagine a new type of sneaker, a new type of architecture, what is a new type of fork, what is a new type of pot or pan, because you're beginning to look at these sort of 3 opportunities, if you will, which are partly functional. This notion of what is it made of, and what are its qualities of being, and then what's the idea? There's some amazing chairs out there. You can look at it and you can instantly see the idea. You can look at a car from the 1950s and you can see its gesture immediately and understand, okay, that's the idea is movement, the idea is this, the idea, you can see it in some architecture because it's dynamic. And I think if you start from that basis of a strong idea, how does the idea manifest itself, and is the idea meaningful beyond me? Then I think that's a strong design journey. And I do not draw the distinction with art. I don't think art has to be as burdened with purpose, if you will, in the way that purpose demands design to behave in a particular way. I think there's an intimate relationship between design and communication. And what I mean by that, it's really about the clarity of the idea or the message it's trying to communicate. And that can be aesthetic, but that can also be very functional. So for example, if I'm thinking of a sketch or an architectural drawing, If you draw it in a bad way, what you'll find is that it will be built in a bad way. If you have a menu and there's typographical errors, somebody might misread the meaning. Also, the size of a typeface on a page might send the wrong message of the hierarchy of what you're trying to communicate. If you think of a political campaign or a logo and what you're trying to impart and how that actually is structured, design has an incredible ability to distill complexity in simple ways. And I think that's when design really becomes strong. And I think bad design is when there's not enough distillation, when the message is being miscommunicated or misrepresented, or not emotionally relevant. I mean, just yesterday I was critiquing my team on some urban plan drawings that we're doing for a landscape, and this one was called a hazard drawing. So we wanted to show all the natural hazards, floods, wind, whatever it might be. And then I said to them, but please make sure that you use tones of red, because red is subconsciously associated with hazards. There's a reason why a traffic light has red to stop and green to go, because green speaks to nature and productivity and abundance. So if you don't understand color and design, you can easily create graphics that poorly communicate your message. And I think it's so that's the intense functionality of, I think, where good design comes in. I mean, I love watching political posters. And it's always interesting because the symbolism behind the colors, which might have come from the 1960s or from before, can be so different to today, and you end up with these sort of gaudy representations, and you end up losing the political message because there's maybe a poor graphic design intent in it. And I think there's such incredible wisdom to be made about understanding the importance of the messaging. But it's not just graphic design. I think it's the same as the uniform of a country when it goes to play at the Olympics, that also sends a message. The dresses for a Miss South Africa, what is the message that is being communicated there? Yes, it's partly fashion, but it's also about communicating something larger than the design itself. So I think good design always manages to communicate, and cities communicate. I mean, the city of Washington, D.C. is designed to project a certain sense of power and order and discipline, both on its citizens but also visitors to the city. It's not designed by accident. And I think there's an incredible power of understanding what design can do to convey ideas. And ultimately, good design is about communication.